The sound of police sirens cut through the quiet evening air, bouncing off the wooden walls of my old red barn. I stood there, hands on my hips, watching as two patrol cars pulled up to my driveway, in a blur of flashing blue and red. Their tires crunched over the gravel, lights painting my pastures in a dizzying glow. At first, I thought it was a mistake. But then I saw her, Karen. She was standing at the edge of my property, arms crossed, chin raised high like she owned the whole neighborhood. Her blonde hair was pinned so tightly it looked painful, and her lips were pursed like she'd been sucking on a lemon all afternoon. "There he is," she shouted, pointing directly at me as if she had just caught a fugitive. "That's the man. He's running an illegal business out of his barn. I told you he's violating HOA regulations." One of the officers, a young rookie I hadn't met before, stepped out of the car. "Sir," he began, cautiously, hand resting on his holster. "We got a call about an unlicensed structure and unauthorized livestock operations." I raised an eyebrow. "Livestock operations?" I repeated slowly. Behind him, Karen folded her arms even tighter. "Don't play dumb. You can't just build a barn in an HOA community and store whatever you want in it. It's against code." And I heard noises, machinery, people coming in and out, probably running some kind of illegal business. The other officer, older and gruffer, glanced between me and Karen. He squinted at the barn, then at me. Something in his eyes changed the moment he recognized my face. The air grew still. The crickets seemed to stop chirping. "Sir," he said, clearing his throat. "Can I ask your name?" I smiled just a little. "Sheriff Jake Hollis," I said calmly, pulling my badge from my jacket pocket. Karen's face turned white, and that's when the real trouble started. Now, let's go back to how all this began. A few months ago, I'd finally retired from active duty. After 25 years as the county sheriff, I thought I'd earned a little peace and quiet. I bought a modest property on the edge of the newly built Cedar Ridge community, a neighborhood that promised country comfort with suburban convenience. What they didn't advertise, though, was that every blade of grass came with a rule, and every rule came with someone like Karen. When I first moved in, I wanted to keep a small barn on the land, something simple, where I could store my tools, a tractor, and maybe a few rescue animals. I'd spent years rescuing strays off the highway and couldn't stand the thought of sending them away. I checked the zoning maps myself. The property sat right on the county line, part of it technically outside the HOA's jurisdiction. Perfect. Or so I thought. The first time I met Karen, she came marching up my driveway in heels that weren't made for gravel. She had a clipboard in her hand, sunglasses perched on her nose, and that practiced HOA smile that hid a world of judgment. "Hello there," she chirped, waving like we were old friends. "You must be the new resident at Lot 14. I'm Karen, president of the Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association. We like to make sure everyone understands our community values." "Nice to meet you, ma'am," I said, offering a handshake. She ignored it. Her eyes darted past me to where the foundation of my barn was being laid. "Ah, and I see you're starting a construction project." Her tone dropped slightly. "Did you get that approved?" "It's on the county side," I replied politely. "I filed the permit myself." Karen's smile flickered. Well, I'll double-check that." And that's when I knew she was going to be trouble. For the first few weeks, things were fine. I kept to myself, fixed up the barn, and tended to the land. Every morning, I'd take my dog, Scout, for a walk, then feed the 2 rescue horses I'd taken, in both too old for farm work, but happy to roam. Life was peaceful, until Karen started showing up. At first it was concerned neighbor visits. She'd drop by pretending to make small talk, but her eyes would always drift toward the barn. "So," she'd say, sipping coffee she didn't even like, "what exactly do you do in there?" "Fix tractors, mend fences, help a few rescue animals," I'd reply. "Oh, so it's like a business," she'd press. "Nope," I'd say, smiling, "just a hobby." She didn't like that answer. The next week, I got a letter, not from the county but from the HOA. It read, "Dear Mr. Hollis, it has come to our attention that you are operating an unapproved structure in violation of HOA guidelines 4B and 7A. Please cease all related activity and submit an architectural review request immediately." I called the HOA office to clear it up. The woman on the phone sounded nervous. Sir," she said, "Karen personally requested an inspection. She says your barn is creating visual disharmony with the community aesthetic." Visual disharmony. I almost laughed. Still, I tried to be patient. I even invited her over to see the barn once it was finished. I thought if she could see that it wasn't some eyesore, maybe she'd relax. That was my mistake. She showed up uninvited on a Saturday morning, storming through my gate like she owned the place. "This is not up to code," she shouted, pointing at my perfectly fine red barn. "The HOA has strict color guidelines, neutral tones only. You can't just paint it crimson." "It's barn red," I said flatly. "That's kind of traditional." "Traditional isn't approved," she snapped. "And what's that smell?" I looked toward the pasture, where one of my horses flicked its tail lazily. "That would be manure, ma'am. Comes with the territory." She gasped like I'd insulted her. "You can't have livestock here." "I can," I said. "County jurisdiction, remember?" That didn't sit well. Her face went redder than the barn itself. "Fine," she hissed. "You'll regret this." And she meant it. Over the next few weeks, she made it her personal mission to make my life miserable. Complaints to the HOA, anonymous tips to zoning, even a call to animal control, claiming my horses were neglected. The officer who came out just laughed when he saw them fat, shiny, and munching hay in the sunshine. But then, one evening, she went too far. I was in the barn fixing a loose latch when I noticed her standing at the end of the driveway, phone in hand, snapping photos. I waved, but she ignored me. She turned, typing something angrily, her lips moving fast. An hour later, I heard sirens. At first I thought there'd been an accident nearby. Then the lights turned into my drive. The officers got out. Karen followed behind, all smug and self-satisfied. "I told you," she said loudly. "I told you something illegal was going on in there." I could see it all over her face. She thought she'd finally caught me, that she'd win. But as I stood there in my barn doorway, watching the rookie officer approach me, I realized something. This wasn't just about a barn. This was about control. About people like Karen, who needed to feel powerful, even if it meant hurting others. I took a slow breath, deciding right then and there I wasn't going to fight her with anger. I was going to fight her with patience, truth, and a little bit of irony. Because the look on her face when she found out who I really was, that was going to be priceless. And that brings us back to where we started: sirens, flashing lights, and a furious Karen yelling at two police officers about my illegal barn. The older officer stood still, his hand twitching as he tried not to laugh. Karen was still ranting. "You see? He's hiding something in there, probably stolen goods. Arrest him already." The younger cop turned to me, clearly unsure what to do. I slipped my badge from my jacket pocket and held it up in the light. "Sheriff Jake Hollis," I said calmly. "How can I help you boys tonight?" Karen's mouth fell open. The color drained from her face so fast it was almost impressive. The officers exchanged looks. And that's when the questions began. "Where are you watching from tonight?" For a few seconds, no one said a word. The evening breeze rustled through the dry grass, and the sound of the flashing police lights filled the silence with a dull hum. Karen's confidence melted faster than butter on a hot skillet. Her face twisted between confusion and disbelief as she stared at my badge like it was some kind of trick. The rookie officer blinked a few times, clearly caught off guard. Sheriff Hollis?" he stammered, his hand dropping away from his holster. "As in, the county sheriff?" "That's right," I said, giving a small nod. "Now, I believe you boys got a call about some kind of illegal activity?" Karen finally found her voice. This isn't funny," she sputtered, stepping forward. "He's lying. He can't be the sheriff. He's breaking HOA rules. You have to do something." The older officer, Officer Daniels, shot her a weary look. "Ma'am, I think we'll handle it from here." He turned to me, clearly trying not to smile. "Apologies for the trouble, Sheriff. We didn't realize." "It's all right," I said, keeping my tone calm. "You were just doing your job." I glanced toward Karen. Some folks get a little overzealous when it comes to enforcing rules. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a goldfish out of water. You can't just build a barn wherever you want," she finally said, her voice trembling between anger and embarrassment. "The HOA has regulations. We have a standard to maintain." "Karen," I said gently, "this barn sits on the county side of the property line. It's fully permitted. The HOA doesn't have jurisdiction here." She froze, her face tightening. "That's not possible," she whispered. "Checked it myself," I replied. "Twice, actually." The younger officer gave her a sympathetic look. "Ma'am, from what I can tell, there's no violation here." Karen's hand started to shake. "You don't understand," she said, her voice cracking. "He's ruining everything. First it was the barn, now it's the animals. Next thing you know, everyone will think they can just do whatever they want. I looked at her for a long moment. Beneath all that frustration and self-righteousness, I saw something else: fear. The kind that comes from needing control in a world that doesn't always listen. Karen, I said quietly, you don't have to make enemies out of your neighbors. You can just talk to people. Most of us are willing to listen. Her eyes darted to the barn, then back to me. For a split second, I saw guilt flicker across her face. But then she straightened her back and forced a laugh. Well, she said sharply, I'll be bringing this up at the next HOA meeting. I'm sure you will, I replied evenly. Officer Daniels gave a small nod, signaling that they were wrapping up. Sheriff, again, sorry for the confusion. We'll clear this up in our report. No harm done, I said. Drive safe, fellas. As the patrol cars backed out of my driveway, the lights fading into the distance, the world fell quiet again. Karen lingered for a moment longer, glaring at me like she wanted to say something else, but she didn't. She turned on her heel and marched down the road, her heels clicking angrily against the pavement. I sighed, patting Scout's head as he came trotting up beside me, tail wagging. Well, buddy, I said. I think we made a new friend tonight. He barked softly, as if he understood. For a while, I just stood there watching the sun dip below the horizon. The barn glowed gold in the fading light, peaceful and steady. I'd built it with my own 2 hands, a symbol of a slower, simpler life. But now, it had become the center of chaos I never asked for. Still, I couldn't help but feel a little sorry for Karen. People like her didn't start off mean. They just got lost somewhere along the way. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was pride. Either way, I decided I wouldn't treat her like an enemy. The next morning, I left a small basket of fresh eggs on her porch. No note, no message, just a quiet peace offering. For 3 days, I didn't see her. Not once. The neighborhood seemed calm again. Birds chirped, kids rode their bikes, and even the other HOA members waved at me when I drove by. I almost thought the storm had passed. Until the letter came. It was waiting in my mailbox that Friday afternoon, folded neatly in an envelope with the Cedar Ridge HOA seal on the front. I opened it slowly, half expecting another complaint about visual disharmony. But this one was worse. Dear Mr. Hollis, following a recent investigation and complaint, the HOA board has determined that your property poses a potential safety hazard due to unapproved structures and livestock. You are hereby requested to attend a mandatory compliance hearing next Monday at 6 p.m. At the bottom, in looping, confident handwriting, was her signature. Karen L. Whitmore, HOA President. I let out a low whistle. She's not done yet, I muttered. Scout barked, as if agreeing. I folded the letter and slipped it into my pocket. If Karen wanted a fight, she'd get one, but not the kind she was expecting. Because I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to teach her something about respect, understanding, and what happens when you let pride rule over kindness. And next Monday, at that hearing, she was going to learn it the hard way. Monday came faster than I expected. The sun was already low by the time I parked my truck near the Cedar Ridge Community Center. It was a tidy little building, white siding, perfect hedges, and a big metal sign that read "Residents only beyond this point." It felt more like walking into a courtroom than a neighborhood meeting. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and stress. A long rectangular table sat at the front of the room where 5 HOA board members were seated. Karen was in the center, of course, wearing a cream-colored blazer and a proud smile that could cut glass. To her left sat a man in glasses who looked too nervous to meet my eyes, and to her right was an older woman who already looked tired of everything. A few neighbors sat in the rows behind me, whispering quietly as I walked in. I heard one of them murmur, "Isn't that the sheriff?" And another, whisper, "Why would she call a hearing against him?" Karen cleared her throat dramatically and tapped the microphone. "This meeting will now come to order. Thank you all for being here on such short notice. As president of the Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association, it is my duty to uphold the community's integrity. Tonight's hearing is about one resident who has repeatedly violated our guidelines despite multiple warnings." Her eyes met mine like she was delivering the final blow in a boxing match. I stayed quiet, calm, and polite. I'd seen hundreds of confrontations like this in my years as sheriff. Most of the time, the loudest person was also the most afraid. Karen adjusted her papers. "Mr. Hollis has constructed an unapproved structure, a barn that fails to meet our color and size standards. He has also introduced farm animals onto the property, which is explicitly prohibited under Section 9, Paragraph 3 of the HOA covenant. I raised my hand slightly. If I may? She gave a forced smile. You'll have your chance to speak after the presentation. The next 10 minutes felt like a bad episode of a courtroom drama. She clicked through a slideshow of photos, my barn, my horses, even me, mowing the grass, and each time, she'd point with her laser pointer and sigh dramatically. This, she said, highlighting a photo of my horses grazing peacefully, is what we're dealing with, a blatant disregard for our community's image. A few people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. One of them whispered, "They're just horses." When she finally finished, she clasped her hands together like a judge about to deliver a sentence. "Now, Sheriff Hollis," she said, emphasizing my title like it was a joke, "you may respond." I stood slowly and walked to the front of the room. "Thank you, Madam President," I began, trying to keep my tone even. "I'd like to start by clarifying something important. My property sits directly on the county line. Half of it, specifically where the barn and pasture sit, falls outside of Cedar Ridge HOA jurisdiction. The barn was built with full county permits and inspected by zoning. Everything is legal." Karen interrupted. "That's impossible. We verified the map ourselves." I turned toward the board. "With all due respect, ma'am, your map was outdated. I brought copies of the current county zoning records." I handed them the documents, neatly printed and signed by the county clerk. The man with the glasses examined them first, his brow furrowing. "He's right," he said quietly. "The boundary line ends 25 feet short of his barn." Karen stiffened. "That can't be. There must be an error." "There isn't," I said gently. "But even if there was, I want you all to know something. I'm not trying to cause trouble here. I built that barn to rescue abandoned animals. I don't sell anything. I don't make noise at night. I just wanted to give a few forgotten creatures a safe place to live." A murmur spread across the room. One of the older residents in the back raised her hand. "Wait, you rescue animals? Like a shelter?" I nodded. "Just small scale. Horses, dogs, sometimes stray goats, all properly cared for." The older woman on the board, who hadn't spoken yet, looked at Karen. "Karen, did you know that?" Karen's smile faltered. "That's not the point," she snapped. "Rules are rules. If we make exceptions for one person, everyone will want to do whatever they please. Next thing you know, people will be keeping chickens and tractors in their driveways." The room stayed silent for a moment. I looked around at the faces watching us, some sympathetic, others uncertain. "Rules matter," I said. "But so does compassion. Sometimes it's not about what we can't do, it's about what we should do. I'm not asking for special treatment, just understanding. I came here for peace and community, not conflict." Karen looked like she wanted to argue again, but the man with glasses cleared his throat. "Madam President," he said, "given this new information, I move to dismiss the complaint. Sheriff Hollis's property is legally outside our authority." Karen's eyes went wide. "You can't just—" "I second the motion," said the older woman beside her. All eyes turned to Karen. Her cheeks flushed bright red as the board voted 3 in favor. 1 abstained, and only Karen voted against. Motion passed. Complaint dismissed. For a long second, Karen just sat there, lips trembling. She gathered her papers quickly and muttered something about reviewing future policy. Then she stood up and stormed out, her heels echoing down the hall. I watched her go, feeling a strange mix of pity and relief. I hadn't come here to embarrass her, but maybe, just maybe, this would make her think twice about how she treated others. As the meeting ended, several neighbors came up to shake my hand. One woman smiled warmly. "We're glad you're here, Sheriff. The neighborhood could use someone like you." "Thank you," I said, smiling back. "I just hope we can all get along." But as I stepped outside, the evening air felt heavier somehow. Across the street, Karen stood in the shadows by her car, watching me. Her eyes were cold. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't over. The evening after the HOA hearing, I returned to my property feeling a mix of relief and lingering unease. The barn stood quietly under the setting sun. Scout trotting alongside me, tail wagging like nothing had happened. The horses grazed calmly, and the smell of hay and earth reminded me why I'd chosen this life. Peace, simplicity, purpose. But I knew better than to think Karen would simply let it go. People like her rarely surrendered control without a fight, and she had already proven that she was relentless. The next morning, I found the first sign of her continuing campaign. A small, brightly colored flyer had been slipped under my gate. It read, "Attention Cedar Ridge residents. Illegal structures and unauthorized livestock operations have been discovered on Lot 14. Please report any concerns to the HOA immediately. I picked it up and examined it carefully. It was neatly printed, as though designed to stir unrest among the neighbors. I frowned, thinking of the meetings and the tension she had already caused. Scout sniffed at it curiously, wagging his tail, oblivious to human scheming. I crumpled the flyer and tossed it into the compost pile. There was no use letting it bother me. I had always believed in handling things with calmness, reasoning, and patience. Angry reactions only escalated problems. For the rest of the day, I focused on the barn. There were repairs to finish and tools to organize, but my work was constantly interrupted by Karen's shadow. I spotted her peeking from behind trees as I mended the fence, taking pictures with her phone. Each time I caught her gaze, I simply smiled and waved. She didn't like that. Late that afternoon, a neighbor stopped by, an older man named Mr. Thompson. He had lived in Cedar Ridge longer than anyone I knew, and he had a quiet way of observing things before speaking. "Sheriff," he said carefully, "you handled that hearing well. Karen, she's always been like this. She wants everyone under her thumb. But I think she didn't expect you to be who you are." I nodded, leaning against the barn. "Thanks, Mr. Thompson. I just want peace for everyone here, including Karen, if she'll let it happen." He shook his head slowly. "She doesn't see it that way. I hope you're prepared. She's not done yet." That night, I walked around the barn one last time before heading inside. Scout trotted faithfully by my side, his nose sniffing the crisp air. The moon reflected softly on the roof, and the property was quiet, almost serene. But I felt a prickle of tension. Karen's fight wasn't over, and I could sense it in the way the neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. The next morning, I was checking the barn doors when I noticed tire tracks in the grass leading toward my side gate. They weren't deep, but they were fresh. I frowned. It looked like someone had driven onto my property, careful enough not to leave heavy marks, but obvious if you knew the land. I followed the tracks slowly, and found them ending near a small stack of firewood by the fence. And there, tucked between the logs, was another flyer, this one more aggressive. "Warning, Sheriff Hollis continues to violate HOA regulations. The board will not tolerate further defiance. Neighbors, beware." My jaw tightened. Karen had stepped up her campaign. She wasn't just trying to intimidate me anymore. She was trying to turn the entire neighborhood against me. I picked up the flyer and crumpled it again, and let it fall into the dirt. I didn't shout. I didn't yell. I simply went back inside the barn and closed the door, locking it carefully behind me. Scout barked once, running circles at my feet. I knelt to pat him. "Don't worry, buddy," I murmured. "We're fine. We just have to be ready for what's coming next." Over the next few days, Karen escalated even more subtly. Anonymous calls to the HOA office, emails sent to neighbors warning about safety hazards, and even a report to the county about unauthorized agricultural equipment in a residential area. Each time, I responded calmly, providing permits, photographs, and evidence that everything on my property was legal and safe. But Karen's determination was unnerving. She didn't see reason. Her mission wasn't about fairness or safety. It was about control. Then came the night that truly set my nerves on edge. I had been finishing repairs inside the barn when I heard the crunch of gravel outside. The sound was deliberate, calculated, like someone testing to see if I was paying attention. Scout growled low in his throat, ears pinned back. I slipped my flashlight into my jacket pocket and crept toward the barn door. Outside, the moonlight illuminated a figure crouched near the fence. At first, I couldn't make out her face. Then, with a sudden flash of recognition, I saw her hair glinting in the light. Karen. She froze when she noticed me at the doorway. For a moment, we stared at each other in silence, the tension thick enough to taste. Then she darted back toward her car, muttering angrily under her breath. I closed the barn door slowly, my heart still racing. She had crossed a line. She wasn't just making complaints anymore. She was sneaking onto my property, testing boundaries, trying to provoke me. And I realized, at that moment, the next confrontation wasn't going to be a hearing or a complaint. It was going to be something much bigger. Scout nudged my hand, sensing my tension. I knelt, brushing his head, and whispered, "It's coming, buddy, and we're going to handle it the right way." As I looked out the barn window toward the darkened road, I knew this wasn't just about a barn or HOA rules anymore. Karen had started a war, and the first real battle was about to begin. That night, sleep was nearly impossible. I kept tossing and turning, listening for any unusual sound outside the barn. Scout curled at the foot of my bed but occasionally lifted his head, ears perked, and gave a low, warning growl. My mind replayed Karen's determined, almost feral, glare from the previous night. She wasn't just a meddlesome HOA president anymore, she had become a threat to my peace and to the sanctuary I'd built for my animals. Around midnight, I heard it again, the crunch of gravel under tires. My pulse quickened, but I didn't panic. Years on the force had taught me to stay calm and observe before acting. I grabbed my flashlight, my pocket knife, and Scout, and slipped quietly toward the barn. The moon hung low, casting long shadows across the field. At first, I couldn't see anything. But then I noticed movement near the fence. A figure crouched low, shuffling silently among the bushes. Karen. She was holding a phone, probably filming, probably thinking she could catch me off guard. Karen, I called calmly, keeping my voice level. Not loud, but loud enough for her to hear. She froze immediately, almost dropping her phone. Her eyes widened, reflecting the moonlight. Sheriff Hollis, she whispered, her voice shaky. I was just checking. I didn't flinch. Checking what, exactly? My property? My animals? She opened her mouth but didn't answer. Her confidence from the HOA meeting seemed gone, replaced by fear, or perhaps the realization that she had gone too far. I suggest you leave, I said slowly, stepping closer, flashlight illuminating the ground between us. Scout growled low, his hackles raised. You don't want to be on my land at this hour without permission. Karen's eyes darted to the fence, then to my barn, then to me. She seemed to be calculating, wondering if she could run, whether she had an escape route. She stammered, but I cut her off. You've been warned multiple times, I said firmly. I've let your complaints slide. I've even answered every question and shown every permit. And yet, here you are, sneaking onto my property in the dead of night. This stops now. For a moment, she seemed to shrink under my gaze. Her lips trembled. Then, with a flash of defiance, she straightened her back. You can't scare me. I'm the president of the HOA. I'm protecting the neighborhood. I shook my head slowly. Karen, this isn't about control. This is about respect. You've crossed every line you possibly could. Trespassing, intimidation. Anonymous reports, these aren't rules. They're harassment, and you're lucky I'm not treating this as criminal trespass. Her eyes widened again, realizing the weight of my words. But she didn't move. She was frozen between fear and pride, like she couldn't decide which was stronger. I crouched slightly, lowering my flashlight to Scout's level. See? Scout doesn't care about color codes or fences. He cares about safety. The animals here care about safety. And you? You need to decide what you care about. Because if you cross that line again, there will be consequences you won't like. But Karen's jaw tightened. I could see the anger bubbling just under the surface, but also uncertainty. She had never expected anyone to speak to her like this. Not calmly, not firmly, not in control. Finally, she took a step back. This isn't over, she muttered, turning toward her car. I'll make sure the board takes action. You've had your chance, I said, voice calm but unwavering. Next time, it won't just be words. Leave the property tonight, and don't come back without permission. She glared at me, then sprinted to her car, slamming the door with enough force to rattle the windows. Scout barked once, tail high, then settled down again, as I watched her headlights fade into the distance. I exhaled slowly, running a hand over my face. The tension that had built for days began to ease slightly, but I knew the storm wasn't over. Karen's pride wouldn't allow her to stop just because she had been confronted. She was patient, calculated, and relentless. Returning to the barn, I checked the locks on all the doors and windows. Scout followed, circling the animals to make sure they were safe and calm. The horses whinnied softly, sensing my unease. I patted each one, whispering reassurances. We're fine, I murmured. Nothing's going to happen as long as we stay careful. Sitting in the barn with Scout curled beside me, I thought about Karen's obsession with control. There was a lesson buried in this madness, one about kindness, understanding, and empathy. I had to remember that while she was relentless, she was also insecure and lost in her own rigid rules. My actions couldn't just be reactive. They had to be measured, patient, and firm. And yet, deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before she escalated again. The next day, the neighborhood would wake up to new rumors. new complaints, and another attempt at intimidation. But tonight, the barn was quiet. The moon hung low and silver over the red roof. Scout lay on the hay, eyes half closed, trusting me to protect this sanctuary. I sat back, breathing in the cool night air, and whispered to myself, "Tomorrow will come, and we'll be ready." The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing relentlessly on the kitchen counter. Scout, still half asleep, lifted his head and let out a soft whine, as if warning me that trouble was already near. I grabbed the phone and saw multiple texts and missed calls from neighbors. Most of them were concerned, asking if I was okay, but a few messages hinted that Karen had gone on another rampage. I stepped outside, the sun barely above the horizon, painting the pasture in gold light. My horses grazed quietly, completely unaware of the storm brewing in the neighborhood. As I walked toward the barn, I saw them more tire tracks in the soft morning dirt leading from the street up to the fence. Someone had been here again overnight. I followed the tracks carefully and found another flyer, pinned to the fence with a small rock. The headline screamed in bold red letters, "Alert! Sheriff Hollis's barn may pose safety hazards to the neighborhood." Underneath, in smaller print, Karen had written, "Residents, please remain vigilant. Violations of HOA regulations will not be tolerated." I sighed and picked it up, folding it neatly into my pocket. She was relentless. Every attempt I made at patience and understanding, every kindness extended, seemed to fuel her determination. Later that morning, I visited the county office to double-check the zoning maps, just to be sure I hadn't overlooked anything. Everything was exactly as I remembered. The barn was fully legal, my animals properly permitted, and the land outside HOA jurisdiction. That knowledge gave me a small measure of relief, but it did little to calm the gnawing tension that Karen was still lurking somewhere, waiting for her next move. Returning home, I found Scout staring at the gate intently. I followed his gaze and saw her car parked a little way down the road. Karen sat inside, hunched over her phone, clearly plotting her next attack. She hadn't noticed me yet. I leaned against the barn, keeping quiet, observing. Patience, I reminded myself, is a weapon in its own right. By late afternoon, she was gone. The neighborhood was quiet again. But I knew better than to assume this meant victory. The quiet was temporary, fragile, like the calm before a storm. As the sun began to set, I started feeding the horses. Their rhythmic movements and gentle whinnies provided some comfort. Scout trotted between me and the horses, always alert. The world outside my property line felt increasingly tense. Karen had made her mission personal, and it wasn't about rules anymore. It was about proving she could dominate me. Around dusk, I heard a faint knocking at the barn door. My hand instinctively went to my flashlight. Scout, growling low in response. Opening the door slightly, I saw Mr. Thompson standing there, holding a small basket of apples. His face was serious but calm. "Sheriff," he said quietly, "you need to know something. Karen has been gathering signatures from neighbors for a new petition. She's trying to get the HOA to enforce stricter rules, specifically targeting your property. Some residents are nervous, not because of you, but because they don't want conflict." I nodded, understanding. "Thanks for the warning. I'll handle it the right way." He hesitated, glancing toward the edge of my property where Karen's car had been parked before. "Be careful. She's more relentless than you realize." After Mr. Thompson left, I secured the barn doors and double-checked the locks. Scout stayed close, tail wagging but ears alert. I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was planning something bigger than just petitions and flyers. The desperation in her eyes during our last encounter suggested that her next move wouldn't be subtle. Later that night, while reviewing the barn cameras I had installed for security, I noticed movement on the edge of the property. Someone was creeping near the fence, slow, cautious, and deliberate. The familiar flash of blonde hair confirmed my suspicion. Karen. She was testing again, seeing if she could provoke a reaction or catch me off guard. I stayed still, watching her shadow flit across the cameras. Scout growled low in response, sensing the tension. I whispered to him, "It's okay, boy. We've got this." Then, without warning, she tried to open a side gate I had forgotten to lock. The metal squeaked loudly, breaking the silence of the night. Scout barked sharply, running toward the gate, while I grabbed my flashlight and stepped into the doorway. Karen froze immediately, realizing she had been caught in the act. She stared at me, mouth open, her entire body trembling with a mix of anger and fear. I was just checking," she stammered, but I didn't give her the chance to finish. "Leave," I said calmly but firmly. "Now, you've crossed the line. Again." She hesitated, then bolted toward her car, slamming the door behind her and leaving tire marks in the gravel as she sped away. The moonlight reflected off the red roof of the barn, and Scout barked once, settling back near the horses as if signaling the immediate threat had passed. I closed the barn door slowly, exhaling. Karen had escalated from complaints to trespassing, and I knew this wasn't the end. She was building to something more dramatic, something that would require every ounce of patience, strategy, and calm I could muster. And deep down, I sensed the next move wouldn't be quiet or subtle. It was coming, and it was going to be big. The days after Karen's midnight intrusion were tense but uneventful. The barn was quiet, the animals calm, and Scout seemed to sense that the immediate danger had passed. Yet, the tension lingered like a shadow over the property. I knew Karen was planning her next move, even if it wasn't immediately visible. People like her never gave up. They just waited for the perfect opportunity to strike. I spent the mornings checking the fencing, feeding the horses, and tidying up the barn. The rhythmic routine helped keep my mind focused, but every creak of a gate or rustle of leaves set my heart racing. The county permits were in order, my animals were healthy and safe, and my property was legal. Yet, the persistent feeling that Karen would escalate again refused to fade. One Thursday afternoon, as I was stacking hay bales in the barn loft, I heard the distant sound of a car pulling up. It was unusual. I rarely had visitors. I glanced down and saw an unfamiliar SUV slowly approaching the driveway. I straightened up, shielding my eyes from the sun, trying to see the driver. The car stopped near the barn, engine running, and a middle-aged woman stepped out. She was not Karen. "Good afternoon, Sheriff Hollis," she said politely, walking up to me with a clipboard in hand. Her tone was calm and professional. "My name is Linda Marks. I'm from the county building department. I'm here for a routine inspection of structures in this area. I was informed about your barn and wanted to verify the permits and safety measures." I relaxed slightly but kept my guard up. "Of course, Miss Marks. All the permits are up to date, and the barn was inspected during construction. Would you like me to show you the documents?" She smiled and nodded. "Yes, please. We just want to make sure everything is in order. I've received a few complaints about this property, but nothing has been verified yet. It's just standard procedure." I led her into the barn, handing over the county approval papers, structural inspections, and animal permits. Linda examined each document carefully, jotting notes on her clipboard. She looked around the barn, inspecting the hay storage, stalls, and even the water troughs for the horses. "Everything seems perfectly fine," she said finally, looking up at me. "Your property is well maintained, and the animals are healthy. This should resolve any concerns." I nodded. "I hope so. I've been trying to handle everything calmly, but it seems some neighbors don't understand boundaries or the law." Linda hesitated, glancing toward the barn doors. "I understand. Sometimes people see what they want to see, especially in tight-knit communities. It's important to maintain documentation and be transparent, which you've clearly done." Just as she was about to leave, I noticed movement near the edge of the property. Scout's ears twitched, and he let out a low growl. My instincts kicked in immediately. A figure was crouched near the fence line, blonde hair glinting in the late afternoon sun. Karen. She froze as soon as she noticed me noticing her. I felt a familiar mix of irritation and anticipation. It was clear she had been observing me, probably hoping for a confrontation or an excuse to escalate. "Sheriff," she called out, her voice attempting authority, "I think you need to stop covering up violations. This barn is an eyesore, and the HOA board will not tolerate it." I didn't raise my voice. I simply nodded toward the county inspector. "Miss Marks, as you can see, everything is legal and documented. Karen, your opinion is noted, but the county regulates this property, not the HOA. Trespassing again is illegal." Karen's jaw tightened. "You can't intimidate me. People will listen." I stepped closer, flashlight in hand from my belt, just in case she tried anything foolish. Scout growled low, standing between us and the fence line. "Karen, you've already tested the boundaries. The law is clear. I suggest you leave before this becomes more serious." She glared at me, frustration turning to panic as she noticed Linda standing nearby. "This isn't fair. The board will act." Linda gave her a calm, professional glance. "Ma'am, my role is to verify compliance with county regulations. The HOA cannot enforce rules outside its jurisdiction." Karen's face turned white. For a moment, I thought she might retreat entirely. Instead, she stomped her foot and muttered something under her breath before running toward her car, kicking up dust as she sped down the road. I exhaled slowly, patting Scout on the head. "Well, boy," I murmured, "we've weathered another storm." Linda smiled faintly. "You handled that well, Sheriff. She seems determined. But your property is in full compliance. You've done everything right." "Thanks," I replied. "Sometimes it's hard to stay calm when people keep pushing the limits." She nodded. "Just keep documenting everything. It'll help if she tries to escalate further." After she left, I walked around the barn and checked the perimeter once more. Scout followed closely, always alert. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the pasture. I knew Karen would be back, in one form or another. She was relentless, persistent, and she wasn't going to stop until she either got what she wanted or realized she couldn't win. I took a deep breath, looking out at the barn and the animals. This property wasn't just a home, it was a sanctuary, and I would protect it, no matter what it took. That night, as I closed the barn doors and sat with Scout by the firelight, I whispered, "Tomorrow will come." But somewhere down the road, Karen was already plotting her next move. The next morning began with the same calm I had grown to treasure: horses grazing peacefully, Scout patrolling the perimeter, and the faint smell of hay and morning dew filling the barn. But even in that quiet, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's shadow was looming over every corner of my property. She wasn't just going to give up. Her persistence had turned into an obsession. I spent the day repairing the fence along the east side of the property, reinforcing it against potential intrusions. Each hammer strike echoed with a sense of finality, as if the barn itself was demanding protection. Scout followed closely, alert and cautious, occasionally glancing toward the tree line as if sensing unseen eyes. Around noon, I heard the familiar hum of a car approaching. But this time, it wasn't just Karen. 2 additional vehicles rolled slowly past the gate, and my gut tightened. Karen's blonde hair peeked out from the passenger side of a dark sedan. In the driver's seat was a man I didn't recognize, holding a camera, clearly filming. The second vehicle, a small SUV, carried 2 women who had been active in HOA meetings. Karen stepped out of the car first, waving at the HOA members in the SUV like she had an audience cheering her on. She strode confidently toward the barn, clearly thinking she was in control. My heart sank slightly, not because I was afraid, but because she had now escalated from flyers and complaints to orchestrating a full display in front of witnesses. I stepped outside, hands empty but ready. Scout barked once, then positioned himself between Karen and the barn. "Good afternoon, Karen," I said evenly. "And everyone else, I see we're having a neighborhood inspection party today." Karen's face tightened into a forced smile. "Sheriff, we're here to make sure you're complying with HOA regulations. The neighborhood deserves safety and order, and we're just concerned about your barn and the animals." I kept my tone calm, but my mind raced. As I've explained before, this property is outside HOA jurisdiction, all permits are legal, and the barn meets county regulations. The animals are well cared for and pose no danger to the neighborhood. One of the women from the SUV stepped forward, folding her arms. "We've seen the complaints. Multiple neighbors feel threatened by the structure and the animals. Isn't there some rule you're violating?" I shook my head. "No, everything here is documented. If you'd like, I can show you the county permits and inspection reports." Karen's eyes flicked nervously to the barn, then back at me. "You're just trying to intimidate us," she snapped. "I'm not trying to intimidate anyone," I replied evenly. "I'm simply asking you to respect boundaries and the law. You've crossed them repeatedly." The man with the camera leaned forward. "We just want evidence, Sheriff. Nothing more." I took a deep breath and gestured toward the barn. "Fine. You may document the property, as long as you stay outside the fence. My animal's safety comes first." Karen's eyes narrowed, but she reluctantly nodded. The HOA members spread out along the edge of the property, while the man filmed from a safe distance. Karen, however, couldn't resist a closer inspection. She stepped toward the fence, peering over it, her face full of disdain. I stepped closer, raising my hand. "Karen, I warned you. Stay back." She froze, clearly startled by the firmness in my voice. Scout growled low, a warning rumble that carried authority. Karen's hands trembled slightly, and for a brief moment, I saw uncertainty flicker in her eyes. Then, suddenly, the situation escalated. One of the women from the SUV, perhaps nervous or emboldened by the camera, tripped on a loose stone near the barn's edge, landing heavily on her wrist. She cried out, startling everyone, including Karen, who took a step back in shock. Scout barked sharply, and my reflexes kicked in. I ran to help the woman, checking her wrist carefully. It was swollen, but thankfully not broken. Karen's composure cracked completely. She started shouting, pointing at me. "This is all your fault. If you hadn't built this barn, none of this would have happened." I stayed calm, kneeling beside the woman. "Accidents happen, Karen. Blaming others doesn't solve anything. Let's make sure she's okay first." Scout nudged her gently, and she relaxed slightly, though still glancing warily at Karen. The HOA members began murmuring among themselves, and I realized Karen had overplayed her hand. Instead of rallying the neighborhood against me, she had created a scene that made her look reckless and aggressive. Karen's eyes flashed with frustration, her face red. She muttered something under her breath and stormed back toward her car. The other HOA members followed, shooting her disapproving glances. I stood and dusted off my hands. "Scout, let's check on the barn," I murmured. "We've weathered another storm." The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the pasture. Despite the escalation, I felt a sense of calm. Karen had pushed further than ever before, but I had remained patient and in control. The barn stood as a symbol not only of sanctuary but of persistence, patience, and the quiet power of kindness over aggression. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't done. Her pride and obsession had driven her to extremes, and I knew this was far from over. And somewhere down the road, I sensed her next move would be even more shocking. The days following the confrontation were tense but quiet. The neighborhood seemed to hold its breath, waiting for Karen's next move. I focused on routine feeding the horses, tending to the barn, and checking fences. Scout patrolled as usual, alert but calm, his ears twitching at the slightest sound. The barn had become more than a structure. It was a fortress, a sanctuary, and a symbol of patience and persistence. One afternoon, while stacking hay bales in the loft, I noticed a small envelope tucked under the front gate. My heart sank. Scout growled softly, ears forward, and followed me to the fence. I picked up the envelope. It was unmarked except for a handwritten message on the front. "You think this is over?" "It's not." I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a crudely drawn map of my property, the barn circled in red. Below the map, in jagged letters, were the words, "Next time, there won't be witnesses." A cold shiver ran down my spine. Karen had escalated from flyers and complaints to trespassing and orchestrating public confrontations. And now this, a direct, threatening warning. It was calculated, meant to intimidate me and unsettle my neighbors. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady my mind. Patience, calm, strategy. I had faced threats before, and I knew the key was not to respond with anger. I tucked the note into my pocket and reinforced the barn doors and windows. Scout sniffed around the perimeter, his body tense, alert to every sound. That evening, I walked through the pasture, checking on the horses. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the fields. Each horse nuzzled me gently, unaware of the tension building beyond the fences. I whispered reassurances to them, brushing their coats, telling them everything would be okay. Scout walked beside me, ever vigilant. Later that night, I reviewed the security footage from the cameras I had installed around the property. Nothing had been tampered with, but I noticed something unsettling. Shadows near the tree line, moving just out of clear view of the cameras. Karen's presence was unmistakable. She was testing, observing, probing for weaknesses. I knew I needed a plan. The situation was no longer just about HOA disputes. It was about personal safety, the welfare of my animals, and the peace of my property. Karen had crossed every line, and it was only a matter of time before her next move became more aggressive. The next morning, I called a meeting with a few trusted neighbors who had shown understanding and support. Mr. Thompson and another resident, Mrs. Allen, agreed to help monitor the property and report any suspicious activity. Together, we walked the perimeter, discussing a strategy to deter trespassing while remaining calm and legal. "Karen won't stop until she sees she can't win," Mr. Thompson said quietly. "She needs attention, control, and a sense of power. We just need to stay united and patient." I nodded. "Exactly. Our job is to protect what's ours without giving her ammunition. Every reaction she provokes is exactly what she wants." For the next few days, we increased surveillance, ensuring cameras were functioning and gates securely locked. I double-checked every permit and inspection document, keeping copies visible for anyone who questioned my actions. Scout stayed alert, his loyalty unwavering, sensing the tension that hung over the property like a storm cloud. Then, One evening, while I was in the barn reviewing records, I heard a sharp knock at the front gate. My pulse quickened, and Scout growled low. I peeked outside and saw Karen standing there, holding a folder. She looked calmer than usual, but her eyes burned with determination. "Sheriff Hollis," she called, her tone deceptively polite. "I've come to talk. We need to find a solution for everyone in the neighborhood." I stepped outside cautiously, Scout at my side, body tense. "Karen, this has gone far enough. You've trespassed, intimidated neighbors, and sent threats. What do you want?" She smiled faintly, a mask of civility over the storm beneath. "I want peace," she said, "but you need to understand I won't stop until I'm satisfied." I nodded slowly. "Then let me make this very clear. Any further trespassing, threats, or harassment will not be tolerated. The law is on my side, and I will act to protect my property and animals. But if you want peace, it begins with respect." Her eyes narrowed, studying me carefully. She didn't respond immediately, then slowly turned toward her car, leaving the envelope and the map behind. The tension in the air remained, thick and heavy. As the night settled over the barn, Scout lying quietly by the horses, I knew one thing for certain. Karen's obsession had reached a dangerous peak, and the next move she made could change everything. The question hung over the property like the rising moon. What would she do next? The tension had been building for weeks. Karen's obsession had grown from passive complaints to trespassing, intimidation, public confrontations, and now direct threats. Every day, I checked the barn doors, reinforced the fences, and monitored the cameras. Scout stayed alert, ears twitching, ready to warn me at the first sign of danger. But despite all the preparation, nothing could fully erase the feeling that the final showdown was coming. The morning began quietly, deceptively so. The sun rose in pale gold over the pasture, casting long shadows across the field. The horses grazed peacefully, Scout patrolling in short, deliberate circles. I went through the usual routine, feeding, checking, fencing, and inspecting the barn structure one last time. Everything was secure, but the quiet only amplified my awareness that Karen was planning something drastic. Around midday, my phone rang. It was Mr. Thompson, his voice strained. "Sheriff, I think Karen has escalated. Neighbors report unusual activity near the entrance to the neighborhood. Cars coming and going, people taking notes, whispering. It looks like she's trying to rally support for one last push." I exhaled slowly. "Thanks for the heads up. Stay vigilant and keep everyone inside. I'll handle it from here." By late afternoon, the activity increased. Karen's car was parked conspicuously near the entrance, and I could see her pacing back and forth, phone in hand, talking to someone I couldn't see. The other HOA members were gathering nearby, whispering, clearly waiting for her signal. This was it, the culmination of her weeks of plotting. I called Scout to my side, crouching slightly to meet his eyes. "We've prepared for this, boy. Stay calm, stay alert." His tail wagged once, but his eyes were serious, reflecting his understanding that things were about to change. As the sun dipped lower, Karen made her move. She stormed down the road toward my property, flanked by two of her allies. She shouted as she approached, trying to rally the neighborhood, trying to intimidate me. "Sheriff Hollis, you can't ignore the people. This barn is illegal. We demand action." I stood in front of the barn, hands visible, body calm. "Karen, this ends now. You've trespassed, threatened, and intimidated repeatedly. This is the last warning. Step back." She froze for a moment, staring at me, her chest heaving. I noticed the desperation in her eyes. Her need to dominate, to control, had finally collided with someone who wouldn't back down. Scout growled low, positioning himself between Karen and the barn, his stance protective and unwavering. Suddenly, one of Karen's allies tried to step past Scout toward the gate. I moved swiftly, blocking their path without raising my voice. "Stay back. One more step, and I will act to protect my property. No exceptions." Karen's eyes widened, and for a brief moment, I saw doubt flicker across her face. She had underestimated me. She had assumed that fear and manipulation would work, that intimidation could bend the law and my patience. But I had remained calm, documented everything, and positioned myself legally and morally on unshakable ground. The tension exploded when Karen, in a fit of frustration, grabbed a stack of papers from one of her allies and waved them aggressively, threatening to storm the gate. Scout barked sharply, and the sound seemed to resonate through the pasture. Karen froze, hearing the authority and warning in his voice. I stepped forward, voice steady but firm. "Karen, this is your final warning. Leave my property, step back, and walk away. If you or anyone with you crosses this line, the law will enforce consequences immediately." She hesitated, her face reddened, her pride clashing with reality. Around her, the HOA members shifted nervously, unsure how to respond. Karen realized, finally, that her threats and intimidation had no power over someone prepared, calm, and legally protected. For several long seconds, silence stretched across the field. Scout stayed firm, ears forward, growling softly. The horses watched quietly, sensing the tension. Then, slowly, Karen's shoulders slumped. She muttered something under her breath, stepped back, and turned toward her car. One by one, her allies followed, casting anxious glances behind them as they retreated. I didn't move until the last car disappeared down the road. Scout finally relaxed slightly, his tail wagging in relief. I walked slowly toward the barn, checking the locks, the fences, and the animals. Everything was intact. Nothing had been harmed. The barn stood as a silent testament to patience, preparation, and persistence. As I settled in for the evening, Scout curled at my feet, the barn calm around us. I reflected on the ordeal. Karen had been relentless, aggressive, and manipulative, but kindness, patience, and adherence to the law had prevailed. Her obsession had been met not with anger but with firm boundaries and calm authority. I whispered to Scout, "We did it, boy. Peace, for now." But deep down, I knew life would always bring challenges. The lesson wasn't just about protecting property, it was about patience, empathy, and standing firm with integrity. Karen's obsession had tested me, but it had also reminded me that calm resolve could overcome even the most relentless opposition. The night settled over the barn, stars reflecting off the red roof, the pasture quiet and safe. Scout sighed, content, and I knew that we had weathered the storm. And though challenges would come again, this chapter had ended with peace restored and lessons learned. Where are you watching from tonight?